Good morning. I want to begin a presentation today called Summer of Change, June through August of 2025. And this presentation is going to be in two parts. The first part is going to be about the conjunction of Saturn and Neptune, which is going to bring about a lot of social change for the world in general and for America and Russia in particular, most likely. And part two, which I'll cover in another video, is going to be about the meaning of this Uranus, Neptune, Pluto mini grand trine that is going to be in effect off and on for the next 4 years. And in particular, the waxing trine between Uranus and Pluto, which is a continuation of the very, very momentous conjunction of Uranus and Pluto that took place in 1965 and 1966 and ushered in all the tremendous social change of the 1960s. So, these influences will begin to make their impact this summer. They'll become more exact next year. And so this summer, the summer of 2025, it is going to be the beginning of, as I say, tremendous and irreversible changes. So let me share my screen and we can get started. This will take just a couple of seconds to get rid of some panels so that my view is not obstructed. We're just about there. Okay, so the Summer of Change, June through August 2025, Part 1. We'll look at the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Okay, now Neptune, it has already entered Aries. It entered Aries on March 30th of 2025. And as I say, when Neptune leaves Pisces for Aries, people want to turn visions into realities. The impetus is now to take action based upon beliefs and worldviews. Also, wars and aggression based on belief systems are more likely. Now, later on, I'll show you a slide that details a lot of the things that happened the last time Neptune entered Aries. And the last time Neptune went into Aries, it was the day after the beginning of the American Civil War. But that wasn't the only conflict around that year. There were several wars and civil wars and struggles taking place around the world. And I'll give you a list of several of those later. Okay. Now, Saturn enters Aries on May 24th, 2025. It says 5:25 up here, but May 24th down below. It will be May 24th in Scottsdale, Arizona. I'm sure somewhere in the world, this ingress will occur on the 25th of May. But for me, it's just May 24th, and for many people watching this, most likely. And by the time I get around to posting this video, Saturn may have already entered Aries. Well, when Saturn leaves Pisces for Aries, people want to build the structures they've been dreaming about. And as Saturn and Neptune become conjunct, old structures will dissolve as new social movements emerge. So once we get these two planets together in Aries, they act upon each other as long as they're in a close conjunction, and they're going to spend most of the summer within 1 degree of an exact conjunction. They won't get the exact conjunction this summer, but the influence of their proximity to one another will be very strong throughout the summer. And then we get the exact conjunction on February 20th of 2026, I do believe. And with these two planets working together, Neptune dissolves structures, and then new ideologies, new belief systems take hold, and society is restructured along some other line. Okay, here you can see when Saturn will be conjunct Neptune this summer within 1 degree orb, doesn't become exact, but goes from about the second week of June through the third week of August. And then in 2026, from about the start of the second week of February through the first half week in March, we have Saturn again conjunct Neptune, and that becomes exact on February 20th, 2026. So the things we see this summer, they can foreshadow what we might expect to see take place in the early part of 2026. So pay attention to what's going on. And for your information, you might want to pause and take a picture of this slide. This shows when Neptune enters and exits Aries. Entered it on March 30th. It will turn retrograde on July 4th, go back into Pisces on October 22nd, turn stationary direct on December 10th, and then enter Aries for several years to come on January 26th. And likewise for Saturn, it will enter Aries on May 24th, turn retrograde on July 12th, enter Pisces again. It retrogrades back into Pisces on September 1st, 2025, turns stationary direct November 27th, and then enters Aries for the next couple of years on February 13th of 2026. So both of these planets, both Saturn and Neptune, are going to dip into Aries for a few months this summer, and then they're both going to retrograde for a little while back into Pisces before turning direct and re-entering Aries in 2026. So it's kind of like an experimentation. We're going to see what it's going to feel like to have both of these planets conjunct in Aries this summer. And then things are going to go back into Pisces. They take a breath, and then they decide it's okay, and they'll go back into Aries for good, or at least for a much longer period of time in the first couple of months of 2026. And on February 20th of 2026, we get the exact conjunction of Saturn and Neptune. Okay. These Saturn-Neptune conjunctions happen between once every 30, 40 years. So roughly every 35, 36 years, we tend to get a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. The last one we had was in 1989, and we literally saw the structure of the Berlin Wall crumble before our very eyes. And there were actually many, many social changes around the world, a lot of rebellions and changes in worldviews and viewpoints, etc. But this Saturn-Neptune conjunction, it's not just your ordinary once every 35, 36 year conjunction where we get some new social movements and sometimes some extremely dramatic social change. This conjunction is happening within the first degree of Aries. The first degree of cardinal signs, we call that the world axis. This is a world axis point. And the last time that we had Saturn and Neptune conjunct in the first degree of Aries was in the year 4361 BCE, before the Common Era. Depending upon whether you're using the new calendar system or the old calendar system, this date here will change, but the year 4361 BCE, that will be precise regardless of which calendar system you're using, which of those two. Okay, so 4361 BCE, that is around the time that historians call the dawn of civilization. Within 200 or 300 years after this point, we began to see writing and hieroglyphics develop, and human beings began recording their history. And now, 6,000 years later, we have Saturn and Neptune again conjunct in the first degree of Aries. The big question for me is this going to be the start of the next evolutionary leap for humankind? Or does this represent the end of our cycle? We had a good 6,000 years of civilization, and now it's all going to be over. Well, actually, things could go either way, and a lot of it depends upon the choices people make. We could certainly destroy ourselves through nuclear conflicts, through climate change, and probably a whole host of other ways. If we make better decisions, though, then yes, this very well could be the beginning of the next evolutionary phase for humankind. And things like artificial intelligence and quantum computing and our experiments in biotechnology and energy technology, they could fuel a renewal for human beings on this planet. So, depending upon the choices we make, it could go either way. But as we'll see in part 2, there are some very beneficial astrological configurations coming up involving Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And I think that just might tip the scale in favor of a rebirth, a new ascendance for humankind. So let us hope that that is the case. I want to take a look at some of the eclipses in 2026, at least the first one and the second one, because this first solar eclipse, it happens just 3 days before that exact conjunction of Saturn and Neptune. So this is going to energize this conjunction even more. It's almost as if having this conjunction occur on a world axis wasn't enough. Having this be the start of a 6,000 year cycle, if that wasn't enough, we also have this eclipse energizing it. And at the time of this eclipse, we have a strong conjunction between Saturn and Neptune that becomes exact a few days later. We also have Chiron conjunct Eris. Eris is a heavenly body beyond Pluto, and the case studies that astrologers have done on Eris indicate that it does act pretty much as the figure, the goddess Eris, in Greek mythology acts. The goddess Eris was a sister of Mars or Aries, and she was the goddess of strife and discord. And with Chiron and Eris coming into conjunction, this is a combination, can be a combination of wounding and strife that people experience in the world. and they're pretty close to one another right now. So, we're feeling that sense of strife, that sense of wounding in the world right now. But at its best, Chiron is not simply wounding, but transcendence, this drive to go beyond the visible world into the invisible spiritual realm. And Eris, at its best, it's not strife, but the things we strive for. So at its best, this conjunction of Chiron and Eris will represent a striving for spiritual growth and joy and transcendence. And some people will react to this conjunction in that way and make great strides. Now, the other thing we have happening at the solar eclipse is a very strong square between Uranus and the Sun-Moon conjunction. And that suggests that the aftermath of this eclipse could be rather chaotic because Uranus always breaks up the existing pattern. At its best, we could get great advances in technology, in creativity, inventiveness, and maybe even a surge in the stock market, since Uranus is in Taurus, and Taurus is concerned with values and those things we need to survive. Money, values, our personal values, and so forth. But Uranus always breaks up the existing pattern. So Uranus, it rules Aquarius. That will help ameliorate things a bit. And like I said, as a result of that resonance, the square could just simply provide the tension needed to go out and create new things, create new technologies. So it's always a glass half full, half empty situation in astrology. Everything that has a negative way of expressing itself also has a positive way. But when the masses are affected, people often choose the negative outcome. I think simply because it requires less effort on their part. So let's see. Consequence of this solar eclipse could be social change, old structures dissolving, new ideologies taking their place, wounding and strife, and breaking up of the old patterns. And it may be technology that breaks things up and leads us into a new world. Okay. I have two charts here for America. Undoubtedly, the chart that most astrologers use for America is what we call the Sibley chart. It's a July 4th chart with Sagittarius rising. A greater percentage of mundane astrologers, though, probably use the July 1776 chart for America at around 11:50 a.m. because this was about the time that the resolution for independence was passed by the Continental Congress. This is when the decision was made to be independent from Britain. In contrast, the July 4th, 1776 chart, well, this is the day on which that resolution, that Declaration of Independence was printed and distributed among the people. The main difference between these two charts, aside from different rising signs, different house cusps, is going to be the moon's position. The July 2nd chart has moon in Capricorn, and the July 4th chart has moon in Aquarius. Now, because news of the resolution for independence went public on July 4th, I tend to see this July 4th chart as representing America's persona, its outward mask. And that certainly corresponds to moon in Aquarius. We tend to see ourselves and promote ourselves as the nation that backs charity, humanitarian concerns, uh, freedom, democracy, working with allies, and the nation that develops all this new technology. That is our outward mask, and that's how we like to see ourselves and promote ourselves. But inside, with Saturn in Capricorn, I'm sorry, Moon in Capricorn, we tend to be more controlling. We have this dark inner side, and we see it both in terms of populations within our country and without our country that we have tried to control and regulate. One of the dark stains on our history is the institution of slavery, and also the horrific ways in which we treated Native Americans and denied their humanity, and the ways in which we have both feared and tried to control every new group of immigrants to this country. And then we also try and control other countries quite a bit and get them. We use our power to coerce them into following our will. So we've got these two Americas. Both charts, I believe, are relevant. I usually favor the July 2nd chart. I just feel like it works a little bit better most of the time, but there are some obvious ways, times that we see this July 4th chart working. So I'll consider both charts when I look at some transits. Now, if I look at this bi-wheel where I have the July 2nd, 1776 chart for America on the inside and the solar eclipse on the outside, these are the important transits. We have transiting Saturn and Neptune, making a square to natal Venus. This was present the day after the start of the American Civil War. This is a Civil War aspect. Venus has to do with our right brain, our nonverbal brain. Venus is connected with what gives us pleasure and enjoyment, and this leads to sort of a nonverbal map of what we consider good and what we consider bad. Those things that are pleasurable to us, they usually wind up being deemed good. Those things which reduce our pleasure are bad. And this helps create this nonverbal belief system. Our beliefs are now being challenged by this square from Saturn and Neptune. And our beliefs will probably change. We're going to feel discontent. We're going to feel confusion from Neptune. Some will become very zealous about this or that belief as a result of Neptune. Others will change their belief system entirely. We're going to feel restriction as a result from the square from Saturn. Things may not be available to us that we're used to being readily available, or it may be more expensive to acquire those goods. So when we have Saturn and or Neptune squaring natal Venus, there is going to be some discontent among the people. Now we have transiting Venus in the lunar nodes, making a square to natal Uranus. This is going to intensify the call for change. For some, with Uranus and Gemini, it's simply going to spur their creativity and their inventiveness. But a lot of people are going to be wanting some sort of revolutionary change. Then we also have transiting Chiron and Aries, making squares to natal Mercury and the Moon. And this could translate into economic problems and intellectual and emotional wounding to people. Americans could feel that personally and financially they're wounded at this point and they have to undergo a lot of struggle, a lot of strife. And at the same time, we have transiting Pluto making a sesquiquadrant to natal Mars right here. Here's transiting Pluto. It's going to be pretty strong, and this aspect lasts for several months. A sesquiquadrant is one of those aspects which is sort of a turning point or breaking point. Sometimes nothing happens at the time of the sesquiquadrant. It's sort of a minor tension, not quite as tense as a square, but it could be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And Pluto is traditionally death and transformation. Mars is aggression. It's connected with war. Uh, there could be accidents. There could be things breaking down, having to be transformed in this country. And with Mars and Gemini, that could have to do with our scientific curiosity, with or just with angry rhetoric communication. It could be transformation of communications of some sort, personal communications or devices used for communication. But there's a greater chance of violence and conflict at this time when we have Pluto making a sesquiquadrant with natal Mars. Okay, here you can see when some of these transits will be in effect for Neptune and Saturn. These are the periods in 2025 when those squares to Venus are going to be pretty strong. And then we have them strong again, particularly in February of 2026. Saturn square Venus, that is exact on the day of the eclipse. And then, of course, the 20th is when Saturn and Neptune are exactly conjunct. And here's another graph you can look at showing some of the stresses to this July 2nd, 1776 chart. Some of the stresses caused by planetary transits going from 2024 through 2027. And we can see a lot of stresses here in 2025 and early 2026. You can see also just how long that sesquiquadrant between transiting Pluto and natal Mars is going to be in effect in 2026. So America has its challenges ahead. Oh, I put a little graph up here at the stock market. We had in 2025 the third Chiron return to this particular USA chart. It was exact on the 17th. Chiron can result in wounding to the nation. A lot of the times that wounding is political. We had a series of Chiron returns in the early 70s, and the political wounding involved Nixon and Watergate. This time around, the political wounding has involved Donald Trump. But just a couple of days after transiting Chiron was conjunct natal Chiron in this USA chart, I think beginning on February 19th, that's when the stock market began to fall off a cliff. So that reflects some of the wounding of a financial nature going on in this country. Okay. If we look at the same eclipse bi-wheel, but this time we put that July 4th, 1776 Sibley chart on the inside, we have a lot of the same aspects. We're just not going to have transiting Chiron square the natal moon because the moon is in a very different position in this chart. But we will have transiting Chiron square natal Mercury, so that can be wounding to commerce and finances and people's left brains, what they're thinking. We still have transiting Venus in the lunar nodes, making a square to natal Uranus. But in this chart in particular, we have transiting Saturn and Neptune conjunct the cusp of the fourth house. And the fourth house represents the people and the homeland. So this chart, which covers more America's persona, how it sees itself, well, what's really going to be affected by this conjunction are the people. Old structures that the people rely on are starting to dissolve. And as I am putting this presentation together, making this recording in the first half of May, we're already seeing structures dissolve that are going to affect the people a lot, or if plans to dissolve these structures are carried through, it will affect the people. For instance, there are people in the White House who want to severely restrict and limit Medicaid. That is one issue on which Republicans will be fighting back against the president, many of them, because their constituents don't want their health insurance to be messed with. But that's just one example of big societal and structural changes that can come about for the people of America, for the homeland. So that's what's going on. And here you can see the transits over this 4-year period. Transits from Chiron and Pluto over the next 4 years to this July 4th, 1776 Sibley chart. And it's pretty much the same as what we saw for the July 2nd chart. Some things just occur a little earlier or a little later. And we don't have Chiron square the moon, but we do have Chiron sesquiquadrate, the ascendant, almost exactly overlapping with Chiron square Pluto. When we get into Chiron square Pluto, let's see here, it's 2026. 2027 starts around its exact on May 1st, 2026. This can be a wounding of America's power or its leader or leaders. It could be a president, it could be financial leaders or other leaders in government. If we go back here, Chiron square Pluto happens about the same time because Pluto doesn't move that fast. So that is exact in this chart on May 2nd rather than May 1st. Okay. Chiron square Mercury, the first time that is exact in this chart on May 18th. Whereas in the Sibley chart, it was exact on May 2nd. I would say that with Chiron squaring Mercury exactly on May 2nd at this time, we were talking about the wounding to come from these tariffs, talking about how the number of containers, shipping containers coming into ports was going to be way down. So this is more how we perceive things, that July 4th chart. But this July 2nd chart, it suggests by the time we get to May 18th and May 20th, we're really going to feel the pain or the wounding. That's still a little bit in the future from the time that I'm making this recording. Let's see, it's about, well, we haven't gotten to May 10th yet, so that's a little bit ahead. So we'll see what happens. Okay, now if we look at how this, let's see, February 17th, 2026 eclipse is going to affect Donald Trump. And remember, this is just a few days before that exact Saturn Neptune conjunction. So that's why I'm going to these eclipses uh, that happen in spring of next year. But when it comes to Trump, he has Chiron and Aries making a square to his natal Venus and Saturn. Venus rules his 10th house. This is going to work to wound his status, his reputation. You'll be feeling strife, have to struggle a bit. But at the same time, Chiron and Eris will be making a trine to his natal Mars, which is conjunct his ascendant. This is going to help bring some healing. Trump's chart is set up in such a way that anytime something bad is happening somewhere, something good is happening elsewhere, which tends to lessen the severity of the bad aspects or the tense aspects. So Trump will get some healing. He'll be re-energized and probably continue on, but he will also likely get a lot of pushback for his policies and things he's doing at this point due to this particular square. He also has the transing lunar nodes making a very strong square to Uranus. And since these lunar nodes tend to move retrograde, most of the time they are applying, that square is applying to Uranus. So the nodes always intensify things. Uranus is in his 10th house, and it makes his leadership style very chaotic. He's always just trying to break up the pattern, and that urge is being intensified at this point in time. Okay, and here are some transits from Chiron and Pluto to Trump over a 4-year period. And we see that there is a lot of activity in 2025 and early 2026, and he certainly is getting pushback. Already we have had Chiron square or square his Saturn. We have Chiron squaring his Venus coming up. That will be exact on June 1st, and then a couple of more times. So there is going to be pushback against a lot of his policies. We're already seeing that and criticism and plummeting approval ratings. Now we also have a lunar eclipse that follows the solar eclipse. It's going to be on March 3rd, 2026, but it's pretty much the same as the solar eclipse. We still have Saturn conjunct Neptune and Chiron conjunct Eris, though it looks like it's a little closer conjunction. Okay, I want to talk about declinations. I think many astrologers probably paid attention to declinations a little bit more in the past. I'm thinking back to the 70s and the 80s when we usually, every year we got a little paper ephemeris for that year, and we used that ephemeris to plot charts and things by hand. And that printed ephemeris, it would have usually the planetary positions and declinations all on the same page. So there's probably a little bit more awareness of what was going on with declinations back then. Now we do everything on computers, and I think a lot of astrologers have begun to ignore declinations. But what declination is simply a measure of how far north or south of the celestial equator a planet has gone in its latitude. And there are going to be certain points which are critical points or turning points. And here, if we look at the sun's annual declination cycle, it shows why the equinoxes and the solstices are turning points. At the spring equinox, we have sun at 0 degrees declination. And then it moves further and further north until at the summer solstice, it arrives at about 23.5 degrees north latitude. Not quite a half, but approximately. And then this is a turning point. It'll start moving south. And at the fall equinox, the sun will again be at 0 degrees declination. And that's also a turning point because after that, we shift not only from northern declination to southern declinations, but you can see graphically the graph changes from what we call concave down, which means it's like a cup that spills water, to concave up. That means it's like a cup that will hold water. When we get to the winter solstice, the sun has gone as far south as it will go to about 23.5 degrees southern declination, approximately. And then that's another turning point. Things turn around and we arrive back at 0 degrees declination once again at the spring equinox. So you can visually see why these equinox points and the solstice points are turning points, mathematically, geometrically speaking. Now, whenever we have an outer planet crossing this 0 degrees declination boundary, changes seem to occur. When Neptune crosses over 0 declination, it denotes a change in the social myth. And when both Saturn and Neptune crossing together, we expect a restructuring of myths that we live by. Now, in 2026, you can see that both Saturn and Neptune are going to cross that 0 degrees declination point not long after their exact conjunction. So this puts even more emphasis on the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. It's going to have an even greater impact because shortly after that, both planets are going to cross that 0 degrees declination point. Saturn does it once, Neptune does it 1, 2, 3 times, almost a fourth time. It's very close here. But this just re-emphasizes that we're in for some big social changes and restructuring. And if we look at some past history, in the 20th century, Neptune and Chiron crossed the 0 declination point together at the end of World War II. The result was a new worldview coupled with healing. And then during the American Civil War, social beliefs changed. Neptune, America transformed, Pluto, and Reconstruction, Saturn, followed. And here you can see we had Saturn, Neptune, and Pluto all crossing that 0 degrees declination point right about the same time. Wow, this page will probably look pretty bright to you after the dark background here. But what this is showing shows in this period from 2025 to 2045 for roughly about 10 years, 2025 to 2035, Pluto is going to spend much of its time out of bounds in the southern latitude. And this is a time when people tend to rebel against authority. And Rosa Finn is a source for this information. If you go to astro.com and then search for this name, Rosa Finn, you'll probably find a very good article she has written on what it means for Pluto to be out of bounds. And actually, after this 10-year period, Pluto will not go out of bounds again for over 1,000 years. But in this period, with Pluto out of bounds in the southern latitude, uh, the people are going to be rising up more and more. They want the power to be shifted from individuals to them. And Pluto goes out of bounds in the southern latitude only during times that it's going through Aquarius. But the next time it goes through Aquarius, we won't get Pluto out of bounds. Okay. Whenever I am crediting someone for inspiration or information, I'll put their name at the bottom. And I think Rosa Finn is probably the first person. No, I have another one. It was a video by the World Astrology Report, a YouTube video, that first alerted me to the importance of looking at these declinations and when something is at one of these turning points. And do I have any before that? Yes. Uh, I've missed some people. I also want to credit Steve Judd, a brilliant British astrologer with many followers, for pointing out in a video that the Saturn Neptune conjunction is going to also take place with a conjunction of Saturn and Neptune to the cusp of the fourth house in the Sibley chart for America. I usually look more at that July 2nd chart for the time that the Continental Congress decided to be independent from Britain. I like that chart a little better, but as a result, I did not immediately pick up on the fact that in the Sibley chart, Saturn and Neptune are going to be conjunct the cusp of the fourth house, and that there will hence be big changes and restructuring to the homeland and the people of America. So, thanks to Steve Judd for pointing that out. And I don't think I have any other people to credit who I missed. So let me get back to where I was. Right here, I want to talk a little bit in particular about Saturn-Neptune conjunctions and America. And it's very important that on March 29th of 2025, this solar eclipse activated America's Civil War point. At the start of the American Civil War, Neptune was at 29 degrees 57 minutes of Pisces. At the time of this eclipse, Neptune was at 29 degrees 58 minutes Pisces. It was possible that another civil war could have started, but knowing how America is these days, I had big doubts that there would be a fighting between two armies in the street. Instead, I was anticipating a lot of court battles and more protests against the government. And we saw both of those things occurring by the time Neptune reached the point where it was at the American Civil War. So this point, the eclipse point, they're going to be sensitive points going forward. And I mentioned that there was conflict not only in America in 1861, but in lots of other places around the world. So Neptune going into Aries, it doesn't affect just America. In 1861, we had not only the American Civil War, we had serfdom abolished in Russia. Benito Juarez captured Mexico City. Amana Empire, if I pronounce that correctly, of Mali fell. Taranaki War ended in New Zealand. There's a peasant uprising in Besdina, Russia. There's the Taiping Rebellion in China, the Argentine Civil War, Australian frontier wars, a war of resistance in French Indochina. And then this last item, it doesn't have to do with war, but has to do with liquids, which are ruled by Neptune. In 1861, we saw the end of the whale oil industry and the beginning of the petroleum oil industry. Interesting change. Okay. Now this table shows when some of these critical points will be activated. So for example, this 3-day period in 2025 from March 28th through March 30th, we had Neptune at the Civil War point, then at the eclipse point, and then on this day, it will enter or exit Aries. On this particular day, it entered Aries. In the fall, from October 22nd through October 24th, Neptune is moving retrograde at this point, and so it exits Aries, goes back into Pisces, and then it's at the eclipse point, and then at the Civil War point. And then in January 2026, we have another 3-day period from January 24th through the 26th, where Neptune arrives at that Civil War point. Then at the point of the March 29th, 2025 solar eclipse, and then it enters Aries. So these will be sensitive times for America in 2025 and 2026. Here I show the days when Neptune will be exactly square Venus, maximizing some discontent among Americans. And I wrote here that Neptune square Venus can result in fanatical beliefs, disinformation, and discontent. The square was exact on April 9th. It'll be exact again on October 4th, 2025, and February 9th of 2026. And here you can see time bands for when Neptune and Saturn square Venus will be exact. Okay, I think I showed this chart earlier, but let's see if I did. Just go back here a bit. Yeah, I showed it earlier, but it's relevant again since we're talking about how this will impact America in particular. So these are periods of discontent in America. And then here I show the dates in the Sibley chart, that July 4th, 1776 chart with Sagittarius rising, where Neptune will be exactly conjunct the fourth house cusp. It was April 29th of 2025, September 12th, 2025, and March 1st of 2026. Neptune conjunct fourth house can result in a dissolution of structures in the homeland as zealous opposition to those in power, while Saturn brings restructuring. Okay, now let's take a quick look at Saturn, Neptune, and Russia, and some others. Russia has a long history of being impacted by Saturn-Neptune conjunctions. And from studies, statistical studies on outer planet conjunctions, oppositions, and events around the world, we know that events can take place even up to a year before the astrological aspect is exact. And we also expect it to carry over even at least a year after the conjunction. So about a year before a Saturn-Neptune conjunction, we had the assassination of Tsar Alexander II in 1881. And a conjunction occurred in 1882. Interestingly, Tsar Alexander II, he was in the process of liberalizing laws and government in Russia when he was assassinated. He was replaced by his son, Tsar Alexander III, and just as Alexander II was going far to the left, his son went far to the right. And there were restrictions on Jews in Russia known as the May Laws that were enacted by Tsar Alexander III. So we had a shift in the direction the country was moving in. The next conjunction occurred on July 31st, 1917. We saw a collapse of the Russian army, disintegration of Russian Empire, food riots, Bolshevik Revolution, which installed communism, which was not a good thing, abdication of Tsar Nicholas II. Also unrelated to Russia, America entered World War I, and the Spanish flu began in 1918. 52 and 53, we had a series of 3 exact conjunctions. And on March 5th of 1953, Stalin died. And that was followed by the subsequent de-Stalinization of the Soviet Union. We also had 2 uprisings that occurred in the Soviet Union during that year. And then, of course, in 1989, we had, again, 3 conjunctions, a Saturn and Neptune, and there were multiple structures that were dissolving that year. The Soviet Union withdrew from Afghanistan. We had the fall of the Berlin Wall, followed a few years later by the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the ending of communism in the Eastern Bloc of Europe, the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, overthrow of the communist dictatorship in Romania, perestroika, which literally means restructuring, continued in the Soviet Union, Cold War officially ended, South Africa began to dismantle apartheid, there were protests in China in Tiananmen Square, China made democratic reforms under Deng Xiaoping. Brazil had its first presidential election after the end of military rule, and the first internet service providers began to emerge, along with the first written proposal for the World Wide Web. So this was a lot of restructuring taking place as a result of that last Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And the big question mark I have down here is what will happen exactly as a result of the February 20th, 2026 exact conjunction? Well, as I say, we'll probably get a preview of it this summer when Saturn and Neptune are very close to one another in Aries, even though the conjunction is not exact. Okay, I think this may be the last part of this presentation. I called it the Winds of War ? There are going to be some tensions rising for both America and Russia. If we look at progressions for the July 2nd, 1776 chart for America, we're entering into a Sun square Mars period. Progressed Sun square natal Mars. This could result in more aggression, more assertiveness on the part of America. And we're certainly seeing these trade wars beginning to emerge. Hopefully we don't get into a ground war. We are taking shots at countries that aren't strong enough to threaten us so much. You know, groups like the Houthis in Yemen and some other groups around the world. But I expect America to take a more aggressive approach to various things over the next couple of years. If we look at progressed Sun square natal Mars, July 4, 1776 Sibley chart, you can see that's already begun to build, and that corresponds quite well with these trade wars that are emerging. So keep an eye on which each of these becomes exact. See which works better. Now, I want to talk also about Uranus returns. That's coming up. And America tends to be engaged in conflict whenever Uranus returns to about 8 degrees Gemini. Its position when America declared independence from Britain. Here you can see dates when Uranus will either enter or exit Gemini. It's going to move back into Gemini on July 7th of this summer, 2025. It will retrograde back into Taurus for a few months on November 7th, 2025, but by April 25th of 2026, it will move back into Gemini to stay for several years. These are the dates when Uranus returns will occur in that July 2nd chart. And we have July 23rd, 2027, November 8th, 2027, May 9th, 2028. So 2027, it's a time of concern. Will we be involved in conflict either at home or abroad? During past Uranus returns, we've been embroiled in the American Civil War. And then during 1943-44, those Uranus returns, we had already joined World War II, but these were the years where we were very involved with the Manhattan Project. Uranus, uranium, seems to be a connection there. So there's a great danger that in the latter half of 2027, that we could be involved in some kind of civil conflict at home or some kind of military conflict abroad. But let's hope not. Let's hope we make better and higher decisions in order to avoid that kind of outcome. Now, these are some transits on January 6, 2021. Most of them will be the same as you have on the to the January 4th, 1776 chart. But I just want to show you here how important transits involving the lunar nodes can be. Of course, on January 6, 2021, we had the insurrection at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. And at that time, transiting Uranus was very strongly squaring the natal lunar nodes. And Uranus is revolution. It's breaking up the existing pattern. In this July 2nd chart, at the same time, we had the true lunar node, transiting lunar node, strongly conjunct natal Mars, intensifying that inclination toward violence. So this is one place where this July 2nd chart works a little better than the July 4th chart, where all you have is just the square from Uranus to the lunar nodes. Okay, now I'm talking about this because we have some hard aspects of Pluto to the lunar nodes coming up. And if we look at past aspects of Pluto to the lunar nodes, conjunctions, squares, we had Pluto conjunct the south node during the time of the American Revolution. We had it square the nodal axis as a prelude to the American Civil War, and there was already a lot of fighting going on in various states between uh, free groups and free states and slave states already taking place during this period. Pluto was conjunct the North Node during the time of the Manhattan Project, and during the mid 80s, fortunately, we did not get involved in a war, but tensions between Russia and America were really at an all-time high during this period. And the so-called doomsday clock, the hands were moved closer to midnight. I remember the tension between Ronald Reagan and Russia at this point, the very uh, provocative rhetoric that was coming out of Reagan. And then I believe it was August 17th, 1987, there was this important date on the Mayan calendar that became known worldwide as the harmonic convergence. And that was a day on which people all around the globe meditated and prayed for peace. They often congregated in groups uh, in cities around the world. Many people made pilgrimages to sacred sites. I went to Palenque, Mexico, as did many other people from around the world. And within a few months of that massive group meditation, uh, President Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev met in person, and they became best friends. They were best friends, BFFs, and the tension between Russia and America suddenly began to subside. Okay, well, guess what's coming up? We have in 2027, 2028, Pluto will make another conjunction to the South Node, and it's going to overlap with this Uranus return. So again, 2027, 2028, these could be very critical years for America. Bad things don't have to happen, and I think America and several other countries have evolved since the times and events that led us into two world wars in the 20th century. So hopefully we will avoid war at this point. But it will certainly be a time of heightened tension for America, 2027, 2028. The wife and I may just take a nice long vacation abroad in fall of 2027, depending upon how things look and depending upon whether we have uh, any money left after all the trade wars. Well, for better or worse, Donald Trump is scheduled to be president during this critical period for America. Uh, he's up there in years. He's had more than one assassination attempt on him, but with his advanced age, uh, there's certainly an increased chance that he could die before the end of his term. He could die from natural causes. But assuming that he is president during this most critical time for America, look at this tri-wheel where on the outside we have his progress chart. Let's see, for January 1st, 2025. So this will certainly be in effect at the time of his inauguration. We have his birth chart as the middle wheel and the July 2nd, 1776 chart as the inner wheel, but you could put the July 4th Sibley chart here. The result is the same. His progress Mars at 14 degrees Libra is conjunct exactly to the degree to his natal Chiron, which is conjunct exactly to the degree to America's natal Saturn. Now, during this first term, Mars was not in play, but he had Chiron conjunct Saturn, and uh, many people would interpret this as Trump is wounding the structure of American democracy. He is tearing down our structures, tearing down our government, wounding our democracy. If, however, you are a staunch Trump supporter, you will view these same events differently. You'll say, Trump is draining the swamp, and that's what we want him to do. We want him to wound and restructure America's government in order to drain the swamp. Well, regardless of which interpretation you prefer, um, with progress Mars involved during this first year or two of his administration, he is doing this restructuring or wounding on steroids. That's what the astrology predicted, and that's what we're seeing happen. I believe the astrologer who first pointed this out to me in a talk I attended was the great mundane astrologer Gary Lawrenson. And if he wasn't the one who pointed it out, well, he's smart enough that he could have. He's a wonderful mundane astrologer. So Google that name, find his webpage online, and enjoy it. And let me just go back to make sure I haven't skipped any other names of people that I want to credit. I think I can get all the way back to Rosa Finn. Yeah, without any other names popping up. So let's get back to where we were. Yeah, just about at the end, I do believe. Now, I want to look at Russia with regard to opportunities or increased chances for conflict. And we know that modern Russia began on December 25th, 1991, but its birth time is debatable. However, we certainly have Saturn in Aquarius opposite Chiron in Leo. And Russia could either integrate healing Chiron into the structure Saturn of its collaborations, Aquarius, with its Baltic neighbors, or it could seek to control and wound them. And while it would be nice for Russia to always take the high road, or America for that matter to always take the high road, Russia is most likely to take the low road, and that's what they've done. They seem to be intent upon controlling their neighbors. Putin is at least, and he wants to restore Russia to its what he sees as its former glory. Now, if we look at a few transits here, from 2026 through 2029, Pluto, which is transformation, will make 5 conjunctions with Russia's natal Saturn. Saturn has to do with restriction, followed by 5 oppositions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with natal Chiron, which suggests wounding. And this could indicate more conflicts for Russia, either internal or external. So in 2026, we've got the start of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 conjunctions with natal Saturn, followed by 5 oppositions to natal Chiron. So we know that Saturn-Neptune conjunctions, they impact Russia a lot. That's what the historical record shows. We expect Russia to be very strongly impacted this time around by Saturn-Neptune conjunction. As I said, we can get a preview or some foreshadowing this summer, and then the conjunction is exact in February of 2026. America will also likely be strongly impacted by this Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and humanity at large will be impacted because this is occurring on the world axis. It's the end of one 6,000-year cycle, the beginning of another. So bottom line is, this is a time of great change. The summer gives us the preview or the foreshadowing, and then the deal will be sealed next year around February 20th of 2026 or shortly thereafter. So pay attention to what happens this summer. It will give us an idea of what to expect next spring. And I think this is my last slide in this presentation. So let me stop sharing. And I'm back. So I hope you found this interesting and informative. Big changes are coming up. They don't have to be bad. It all depends upon the decisions that we make. And as we saw with the harmonic convergence, prayer and meditation can make a difference if enough people are involved. So raise your voices and protest, contact your political representatives, your senators and representatives in Washington, D.C., visualize world joy. Pray for peace and joy. Imagine joy and peace spreading around the world. And that too might help steer things in our favor. This could be the end of humanity, but could also be the beginning of a new humanity. And as I said, keep an eye on the summer. It will preview or foreshadow what is to come. And so this goes over some of the challenge and some of the promise of good things related to this time that we are in. And in part two of this presentation on Summer of Change, I'll talk about the beneficial aspects between Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto that begin this summer. Go into take a really deep dive into the meaning of the upcoming waxing trine between Uranus and Pluto, how that is a continuation of events that started back in the 1960s. And hopefully the series of beneficial outer planet aspects we have coming up will be enough to steer us in the right direction. So I hope you enjoyed this part. I hope you join me again for part two. And for now, I'll just say so long and be well.